Okay, so again, welcome to the review session. Make sure you sign in on the sheet. Those of you that are watching this on YouTube, when you take notes, make sure that you are putting a time stamp. So if at 1:50 I talk about classical conditioning, write down 1:50 on the left-hand side. Take a decent amount of notes also. If you hand it in, you have like 10 things written down, you're not going to get credit for it, okay? So again, this is for the Unit 4 test. That covers chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. As I mentioned briefly in class today, the test includes 50 questions, multiple choice. Most of those questions are application, where it gives you a scenario and asks you to tell me what that scenario is describing. So then from like 51 to 65, I think, is matching in one big section. In that section, you only use each option one time. Then from 66 to 80 is identification, where it would give you a scenario and you have to identify what that is, whether it's like positive punishment, negative punishment, positive reinforcement, and so on, conditioned stimulus, unconditioned stimulus, and all that. So I would say that because of the nature of this test and how there's so much carryover in other units, I tried to emphasize chapter 9, which was focused on learning. So basically the concepts of classical conditioning and operant conditioning are probably the two concepts that are most heavily assessed on this test. So I would say that if you have that inside and out, you know, the concept of Pavlov and his dogs and the unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response and all that, and then positive and negative reinforcement and the associated concepts, those concepts alone probably take up 30 roughly of the questions on the test. So of the 80 questions on the test, about 30 have something to do with classical or operant conditioning. So let's start out and I'll give you a few scenarios to see if you understand those concepts, okay? If, let's say, I give you a bunch of donuts someday in class. Okay, I give you a whole bunch of donuts someday in class. You're in my 7th period class. Immediately after that, you decide to go work out, and you get really, really sick because you work out too hard and you throw up. And then from then on out, you can't stand donuts. That's the scenario, okay? What best explains that concept in general? Would it be classical conditioning or operant conditioning?
Classical.
Classical conditioning best explains that concept totally. So now, in that scenario, what is the neutral stimulus?
Donuts.
The donuts. Why are the donuts the neutral stimulus?
Because they don't make you throw up or anything. They don't have an effect on you.
They do now. Before conditioning, they didn't. You enjoyed donuts, you ate them, you're like, nummy, these are great. I enjoy donuts. Sandy's donuts especially, thank you. Right? Those are so good, I love them. You get really sick, if you get sick enough and throw up bad enough, you will not like those donuts, no matter how good the donuts were before. That's an explanation of a classically conditioned response. Specifically, what type of conditioned response is that called? If it's food related, what's it, and the taste of food, what's it called? It's called the taste aversion, good. So, Riyadh said the neutral stimulus would be the donuts. So, prior to conditioning, what would the unconditioned stimulus be? Working out too hard. You don't have to be trained to feel sick. If you run hard enough, you're gonna feel sick, right? Different people have different thresholds, depending on how in shape you are, mental toughness, physical characteristics, whatever. But you work out hard enough, you're gonna get sick. After conditioning, what would the unconditioned stimulus be? Same thing. After conditioning, the unconditioned stimulus still works, right? After conditioning, you work out hard enough, you're still gonna get sick, okay? What's the unconditioned response before conditioning? In that scenario, what's the unconditioned response before conditioning?
Getting sick.
Getting sick, yeah, it's what the organism or the person does. In this instance, let's say throwing up, right? So now, what's the conditioned response?
Same thing.
Throwing up, getting sick. So how do you identify whether it's the unconditioned response or the conditioned response?
Before,
what causes it. Not so much before or after conditioning, but what causes it. So if the donuts cause it in this analogy, the donuts then are what? Conditioned stimulus. If the running a bunch is what causes it, in that instance, what is the response, or what would the response be called? Unconditioned response. Yep, response. Okay? So you're going to get some scenarios on that, and you have to identify what's the neutral stimulus, what's the unconditioned stimulus, and so on. Okay, now let's give another scenario. Let's say you're in the commons and you're making a bunch of messes, you and your group, like a lot of people do, right? And then I want you to give me an example of something that would be a positive reinforcer regarding you making messes in the commons. Let's start this way first before, what is a reinforcer in general? It's something that does what with a behavior?
Encourages the behavior.
Encourages or increases the likelihood. What's the punishment?
Decreases the likelihood.
Decreases. If it's positive, what does that mean? Something's been added. If it's negative, what does it mean?
Taking something.
Something's taken away. So let's go back to that scenario again. You're in the commons, you make a big mess. What would be a positive reinforcer to that?
Somebody says good job.
Somebody says good job. So you get attention from somebody that thinks it's cool to be a rebel or whatever. They added the attention to you. They say good job. Makes it more likely that you engage. Your buddy bets you $10 to dump syrup all over the table. He hands you $10 after you do it. Handing you the $10 would be what? Positive reinforcement. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you another scenario. I want you to tell me, is it what it fits with. Is it negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and so on? Okay? The principals show up. Again, you're making a mess now. That's the scenario. You make a big mess. The principals show up, and they make you clean all of the tables. What would that be?
Positive punishment.
Positive punishment. They've added a task you have to do that would make it less likely that you would engage in that behavior. Typical person, you say, hey, you gotta clean all the tables now. They're not gonna wanna do that again. Good. Let's say that they make you eat lunch in the principal's office from then on out. For like the next couple weeks, you have to eat lunch in the office away from your friends. Negative punishment because? Yeah, they're taking the social interaction away from you. So that would be negative punishment. And it would make it less likely you engage in that behavior, right? Okay, let's say, well, somebody give me an example of negative reinforcement now. Negative reinforcement is the one that most people struggle with, but give me an example of that.
You take a kid's cell phone away to make them, if they didn't clean their room, it would make them less likely.
If it's less likely, it's punishment, right?
Make them more likely to clean their room.
How about this? You sit by somebody that's super, super annoying in the lunchroom. Like the most annoying person you know. And they're also like really particular, they like things neat and clean. You dump a whole bunch of syrup on the table next to them and just set it there, it drives them bonkers. They don't want to sit in that spot ever again. Okay, what have you taken away in that instance?
Cleanliness.
No. You've taken away the annoying person. So you've made, that annoying person is not going to sit by you anymore. So is that going to make it more likely or less likely that you would make a mess in the future? More likely. Okay, do you see what I mean? So if you take something away, what is it always? Negative. If it makes it more likely that a behavior is going to be repeated, what is it always?
Reinforcement.
Reinforcement. If you add something, what is it always? Positive. If it makes it less likely that a behavior will occur, what have you done?
Punishment.
You've punished. So when I'm given one of those scenarios, first I would start with, is something being added to the person or organism, or is something being taken away? Then you can narrow it down from there, right? Is the behavior more likely or less likely because of what is being added or taken away? So that's how I would start. I wouldn't just think in general, okay, is this positive punishment, is it negative reinforcement? Break it down into steps. Is something added or taken away? If something's taken away, you know it has to be what?
Negative.
Negative. If something's added, you know it has to be what?
Positive.
Positive. Okay. So there's a lot of scenarios like that. Let me ask you a few questions about things that are related to those scenarios then. If something is inherently, in and of itself, a reinforcer to an organism, they don't have to learn that it's a reinforcer, it's naturally a reinforcer to them. What is that called?
Instinct.
Go ahead.
Primary reinforcer.
Primary reinforcer is correct. Give me an example of that.
Isn't that like your basic needs?
Yeah, so some basic needs that you have
Food.
like food, sleep, so on. So that's a primary reinforcer. What's a secondary reinforcer?
Isn't it something that you use to achieve that end? So like you would get money to get food?
Yeah, something that you can use to fulfill a primary reinforcer or to get a primary reinforcer, or reinforcer. So, money is a good example of a secondary reinforcer. Maybe trying to look really nice. If you look really nice, buy new clothes and clean yourself up and all that. That could be a secondary reinforcer because it could allow you to, get a job. That then would allow, getting the job then would be a secondary reinforcer, and then that allows you to get money, which is a secondary reinforcer, which then allows you to buy food, which is a primary reinforcer. Okay? So be able to identify some of those and give examples. Let's do another concept related to classical and operant conditioning again. If I remember the example I gave where I said relax and then threw the brain at people, said relax through the brain at people. If I did that enough, if I say relate, it sounds similar, but you'd still probably duck. What's that an example of? And then while you are thinking of that, Mr. Benson, can you catch this for Drew?
What
You
do
ready?
mean?
Sorry.
What do you
High.
mean generalization, Slocum?
Generalization is correct. Generalization. Now, if I say relax and I throw the brain at people, I say relate, and I don't throw the brain at people, I say relax, say relate, keep going back and forth. Eventually, people figure out that relate does not cue the classically conditioned response. It doesn't come with the thing flying at them. So, what is that process called? No, that's a term, but it's not in this instance.
What was the question?
So you learn that relate is not the conditioned stimulus. What's that called?
Discrimination.
Discrimination.
Oh.
Yep. Discrimination is correct, because you can tell the difference between two similar stimuli. Okay. If you see somebody behave in a certain way and you copy that behavior, what is that general process called? Starts with an M. Logan, you're right? Long day? What's the answer?
Modeling?
Modeling's correct. Yeah, if you copy somebody's behavior, that's modeling. When we talk about classical and operant conditioning, which of the contemporary approaches is that most tied to? Behaviorism. Good. Okay. We talked about classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and then social learning. Those are the three sections on learning. Social learning is where you're an active participant in your own learning. So I gave the example of like little kids playing, pretending to be mommies and daddies and stuff like that. Modeling and all that is an example of social learning. What's the key difference between behaviorist learning, like classical and operant conditioning, and social learning? What's one of the key differences between those? in behaviorism, operant and classical conditioning, do you really have a choice?
No.
No, behaviorists believe that you're just responding to stimulus in your environment. So you're just a sort of a machine that's responding to the right stimulus. In social learning, you have free will, you can choose how you're gonna act. So in education, there's a lot of theories that are based around some of this. One of those theories is called Bloom's taxonomy. It discusses it in the notes a little bit, how you have different levels of learning that people can engage in. So again, that's one example of it. What is a system where you can get like stickers or a punch card? If you ever go to like coffee shops, or this weekend my wife and I went to Cold Stone, she still had a leftover gift card. You can get little punches at Cold Stone, and then once you get enough punches, you can get free ice cream, right? What are those examples of? Yeah, that's true, but the like fake money or stickers or passes in school that you can trade in to get like a free assignment,
Economy.
punches, what's that?
Something economy.
Something economy.
Token economy?
Token economy is correct. Good. You remember how I told you the story about the dog that was in the Skinner box and then they'd shot the dog? And eventually, if there was no way to solve the problem, the dog just never would try. Even in the future, when there was a really obvious solution, they would just lay in the corner and whimper. What does that demonstrate?
Learned helplessness?
Learned helplessness. So give me another example for humans of something with learned helplessness. Mr. Riccozzi, we're doing a review session now.
Dan Benson.
You wanna borrow him? Are you, oh, that's an example of learned helplessness?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
You want an example?
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan, I have to pick on that.
They-
Okay,
I'll swing by after, do you have a question real quick, or is it?
no, okay, wait, well, I didn't know you had a period 8. He's always in the social studies office.
I don't-
Period.
I don't have a period 8 class. The day before big unit tests, I always do a review session.
Oh, is that what's going on here?
That's what's going on.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, Danny.
That's all right. So give me an example of learned helplessness besides Dan Benson.
It's like some people feel sorry for themselves in school, like if they have like a hard home life, they just won't do their homework, and even if like that doesn't relate to what their family does, they just don't do it, so they feel
Okay.
like helpless.
So they've learned that it doesn't really matter to try, so then they don't. So I've had some students, here's an example in world history. We lost a day because of the storm, right? And because of that, or the storm that hit at like 5 o'clock. I had to rush and not go through all the notes that I wanted to. So I let them use a note card on the test. Had to be a single note card. I had some students that didn't even do that. So I mean, if I told I'm not telling you all of this to be sure, okay? But if I told all of you, hey, tomorrow you can use a note card on the test, who's gonna show up with a note card for the test? Filled out. Like, all of you probably are going to. Because you see the direct correlation. If you have a note card, you're gonna do better probably, right? But to a lot of them, they're just so, they've failed so much at school that they just kind of given up. Another example, at some point, I tell this humorous story about me. Who was that student? Oh, Lexi Brown, okay. I tell you a story about me in high school, going 1 for 20, 1 for 30, whatever it was. Eventually I get back to Medora, I ask a girl out, I get shot down, I'm like, I'm done, I quit. So learned helplessness, right? I got shot down so much, I'm like, it's done, I don't even wanna try anymore. So that's an example as well. So be able to identify some examples of learned helplessness. If I try to teach you something and you can't demonstrate to me that you've learned it, but then when you go to take the test, you actually get the question right, what's that an example of? Luck? Yeah, it could be. Yeah. It actually starts with an L.
Latent learning?
Latent learning is correct. Let's say you're learning how to swim. You're learning how to do the side stroke or breaststroke or whatever. As part of that process, the instructor actually has you stand up or weigh it in a manner where you don't have to use your legs and just has you focus on the arm part, and then they have you do just the leg part, and then eventually you put it all together. What type of learning is that, or what's that an example of? Where you put all of the moves together to try to learn something? Bree, what is it?
Chain something.
Chain-ing.
Chaining.
Chain-ing is correct. Good. Did you write your score on that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then go ahead and put that all in the bin, including the note card. Thank you. If you have to learn in the same way all the time, like you have to be studying in the same spot, you want the temperature in your room a certain way, you have to have a certain type of music playing in the background, or you're not gonna do it as effectively, what is that an example of? Ashley, idea? That's state-dependent learning. That's one of the other terms in the session. Okay, let's talk about memory a little bit. Remember how we had that graphic that showed you the different types of memory and then it broke it down? We have the processes of memory and the stages of memory, types of memory. Those are kind of the main concepts to know from the memory section. So you have sensory memory, you have short-term memory, and you have long-term memory. Sensory memory is what you are experiencing in any given moment, just for a brief instant. Short-term is like your working memory, what you're actually working on in a given amount of time. And then long-term is information that you have stored in your long-term memory that you can access and pull out at a later date. So those are the types of memory. There's 3 processes of memory. What's the first process? Encoding. So that's putting the information together, getting it into your memory. What's the second process?
Storage.
Storage. So that's when it's sitting there, you're not activating it at all. So if I were to ask you to think of your address, most of you, hopefully all of you, know what your address is, right? So before I said that, it wasn't in your memory at all, actively being accessed, but it was there, it was stored in your memory. When I asked you to think of what your address is, that's retrieval, you're pulling it out and making it useful. So you have encoding, storage, and retrieval. If you're trying to learn something and you just repeat it over and over again, what type of rehearsal is that? Is that maintenance or elaborative? Maintenance. If you create some meaning out of it, like the guy that thought of Cookie Monster riding a horse, or Britney Spears singing a song in his living room, what type of rehearsal is that? Elaborative. Good. Give me 2 types of declarative memory.
Episodic and semantic.
Episodic and semantic. Give me an example of each of those. Why don't you give me one? You can pick.
Like that episodic one, you can just like remember a time in like your childhood in which, I don't know, there was like a big storm or something.
Yeah,
Just-
episodic memory is biographical in nature,
Yeah.
so you remember the details of the event and what happened. What's semantic memory then? One example of semantic memory is the definition of words, basic facts. Who's the president right now?
Barack Obama.
Barack Obama. Is that episodic? Have you met him actually? No. If you've met him actually, you have some episodic memories. If you've seen him on TV and you remember a time where he gave a State of the Union speech that was really influential for some reason, that's episodic. But just the fact that you know that Barack Obama is the president, that's semantic, okay? What's the other type of long-term memory that we talked about? Declarative is the general term for those two.
Oh,
Procedural is correct. What's an example of procedural memory?
Riding a bike.
Riding a bike, walking, playing video games, whatever. Okay, good. What's the ability for you to identify that you are familiar with a situation or that you know somebody? So we talk about the difference between recognition and recall. If you're in the mall and I pull out people that you all graduate, and then 50 years from now, somehow I get everybody that was in this room at this exact time or in the class that we had, and I put them in the room and you can kind of like tell who they are a little bit. If you actually know their name and can say who they are and all of that, without seeing them, and I were to just ask you who was in the class and you tell me, is that recall or recognition? Recall. If I get you all together in the mall and say, pick out the people that were in the class, you have some cue already, what is that an example of? Recognition. Okay, good. What are the mental frameworks that we use to make sense of something in the world or a past experience? So we have a mental set for what like cops look like or what school should be like or all of that. What's the term for that?
Is it prototype?
No. Well, if I would have explained it a little bit, it could be prototype.
Schema?
A schema, exactly. Yep. What is a mnemonic device?
So like acronyms and stuff.
Acronyms or sayings that are designed to help you to remember something. So they're unrelated, but they're examples of how to remember something. Do you remember when I had the big list of dates on the board and I asked you to remember them? A lot of people interpreted, or I should say numbers, a lot of people interpreted those as dates. If you break up information into smaller pieces to try to remember it, what is that called?
Chunking.
Chunking, good. So why does that work?
Because you can like remember, say it's like 1967 is when that happened, so you just remember it like in pieces.
And you can remember less.
It's-
Like each number individually after
Yep. Yep, and also it's elaborative rehearsal because you're attaching meaning to it. If you have a date, there's more meaning than the digit. Good. Okay, if you like, you're trying to remember something and you add details that really didn't happen, you're not intentionally trying to lie, but you add details to the story that really didn't happen, you kind of mix things up. What's that called? That's also one of our terms. I think you said that before. Somebody said it?
Stuff.
Fabulation.
Confabulation is correct. Okay, if I were to tell you, so all of you came to the review session, you're studying, you go home, you study another hour right when you get home, you get home again and you study another hour, and then you wake up in the morning and you study another hour, so you've studied 4 hours total. Then one of your friends gets home at 9 o'clock and they just stay up and study 4 hours straight for the test. Which one of you is going to do better?
When I took breaks.
You, the person that took breaks and studied smaller chunks over time. What's that called?
Zygarnik effect.
The Zygarnik effect if you're interrupted, take a break, or what's another term for dividing up your studying? Something practice. It's called distributed practice. Okay, we have 5 examples of types of thinking. Somebody list one of them.
Image.
Image is one.
Symbolic,
Symbol is another.
Concept.
Concept is another.
prototype.
Prototype, and rule is the last one. Okay, if I were to tell you, like words, like chair, you think of the word chair, which unit of thought does that best represent?
Symbol.
A symbol. If you close your eyes and you see what a chair looks like, what is that? Image. If, when I say think of chair, you think of the big recliner at your house that you always sit in specifically, what is that big recliner an example of?
Prototype.
A prototype? If you think, that's my chair, that statement is an example of a rule. And which one did I miss?
Concept.
Concept, okay, so,
What is a rule, like the definition?
yeah, a rule is a statement of relationship between 2 different concepts. So, chair itself is a concept, right? The idea of something that has 4 legs, that has a bottom and a back that people sit on, that's an example of a concept. So you guys understand the difference of those and could identify some of them? Okay. Now let's talk about types of thinking. As you're sitting here in class or in this review session, most of the time you're trying to focus and understand what's going on and all of that. What type of thinking are you engaging in? What type? Convergent or directed. Inevitably, some of you probably were spacing out a little bit in here, thinking about what you have to do next. What's practice gonna be like later? I'm really hungry. Cheetos would be nice, but they're kind of greasy and they get my hands all orange and that's kind of nasty. Wait a second, I should be thinking about something. So when you're engaging in all of that thinking that's not related to the review session, what would that be? Divergent or non-directed. When you pause for a second and say, I gotta quit thinking about Cheetos, I gotta think about this, what's that? Metacognition. So again, be able to identify examples of that. Also be able to identify types of problem solving. What's that?
This thing's flashing.
Like the battery's dying or it's running out of memory?
There's an orange thing in the middle flashing and it says 3 minutes to the right of it.
Okay. Yeah, we're almost done with this part anyways. I'll go a little faster to try to get more on for everybody else. We talked a little bit about phonemes and morphemes. Phoneme is the shortest unit of sound in a language. Morpheme is the shortest unit of meaning. So let's take the word bills, like dollar bills. Okay? In bills, how many morphemes are there? 2. So bill is one and S is another. Okay? In that instance, how many phonemes are there? 4, because the 2 L's together are only one phoneme. S is a phoneme, it's a sound, B is a phoneme, I is a phoneme. So that's discussed a little bit in the notes as well. Hierarchy of needs is most related to which theory in psychology? Humanism's correct, good. What's the top level in hierarchy of needs? Self-actualization is correct, good. Know also the 4 theories of motivation, we talked about that. Be able to differentiate between a drive and a need. Then also, if you look at the notes for chapter 12, I'm trying to rush here and I'll continue after for us, but it talks about like the James Lang theory, the opponent process theory, some of those things, be able to identify those, the Cannon-Bard theory. There'll be a scenario where you have to identify some of those things, okay? Let's see. What part of the brain is associated with hunger and eating? There's a study the book talked about where they damaged that in rats and they overate till they died. So there's subparts to this part, but what part is it overall? Hypothalamus is correct. Good. Okay. Is it still working?
Yeah.
Okay. In Harlow's experiment, what was more important? What types of needs were more important?
Comfort.
Comfort. Good. Blind children smiling suggests that emotions are tied to nature or nurture? Nature, because they couldn't learn it from somebody if they can't see. Good. Okay, so like I said also, there's a section of matching. Some of that has people in it also, so know some of the people and what they're tied to. So who's the main guy for classical conditioning with the dogs?
Pavlov.
Pavlov. Who's the main guy for operant conditioning? B.F. Skinner's the main guy. Good. Did it quit or is it still working?
It says 0 minutes and it's flashing.
That's probably got like 10 seconds left. That's fine. What part of the brain is most tied to emotion? Encoding memories. What part's most tied to encoding memories?
Is it the corpus callosum?
Oh. Somebody said it. Hippocampus is correct. Good. Where are most memories stored? The cerebral cortex is correct. Good. Okay. And that, like I said with the essays, those are related to applying some of the major concepts to the videos. we have the TED Talks and the videos and stuff that we watch. So there's no real surprises there.